All right, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling a question that's always kind of bothered me. Why was the British slave trade so hard to abolish? You'd think. Something so obviously awful, people would just, I don't know, stop. But looking at these sources on abolition, it's way more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's tempting to oversimplify, right? Like good versus evil, but it was way messier than that.
It really was.
Hmm.
And the sources show it wasn't just about, like, changing minds. There were some huge economic and political hurdles. For example, some members of parliament actually owned plantations. Crazy, right?
Talk about a conflict of interest. It shows how deeply embedded the slave trade was in British society. It wasn't just individuals either. Whole cities relied on the tax revenue it brought in.
So you've got officials thinking, ending slavery, okay, maybe. But if my city goes bankrupt, then what?
Exactly. And that fear was everywhere. Think about all the jobs tied to the trade shipyards, ports, manufacturing. People felt their livelihood was at stake.
It's like a whole system built on something horrible. But there's more. It wasn't just economics. Our source also talks about Britain's global standing.
Right. The slave trade was tied up with their naval power. It was a source of experienced sailors, which they thought was essential, especially against, France.
So come wartime, the argument was, we need this to even win. National security, like, trumped morality.
It seems that way. It's almost like fear was a weapon for the pro-slavery side, playing on those anxieties, economic collapse, social unrest, Britain becoming weak if the trade ended.
And they were good at it. This source has some chilling examples of, like, manipulation. Merchants would send petitions basically threatening financial ruin.
Even ship captains, the guys who saw the Middle Passage firsthand, they'd downplay how bad it was, almost like they had to protect themselves.
It's wild how far this influence went. The source even mentions African rulers getting pulled in, worried about losing their own power and wealth if the trade stopped.
And it's even crazier how world events, ones about freedom, got twisted to support slavery. The French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, these huge movements against oppression, somehow used to argue for slavery.
Bonkers, right. It's like, see, freedom equals chaos. Shows you how powerful that fear was. But even with all that going on, there were people who just wouldn't give in.
Absolutely. William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, Olaudah Equiano, they saw through all that noise, the fear, and dedicated themselves to, fighting for what's right.
It's like they were battling on multiple fronts. Wilberforce, he kept using his spot in Parliament to bring up these anti-slavery bills, year after year.
Amazing persistence, really. Even when he lost, he'd bring it up again, making people face what was happening.
Like he knew change doesn't just happen. Got to keep chipping away at it. And then there's Clarkson, who had a, more in-your-face approach.
Oh, yeah. He got the power of, seeing is believing. He'd collect these things, shackles, branding irons, and make these shocking displays. You couldn't ignore it.
Especially back then, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone could read. So those visuals, they'd hit harder than words sometimes.
Totally. And then, of course, you've got Equiano. His story as a former slave, that was huge.
Can't imagine the impact. Hearing someone who'd been through the Middle Passage actually lived on a plantation.
His autobiography, it's like undeniable proof, made the victims of the slave trade real people, not just some statistic.
It's like his voice fought back against all that dehumanizing stuff the pro-slavery people were spreading. So you have these individuals working nonstop. But the source also mentions the economy playing a part, yeah.
Definitely. When the Industrial Revolution got going, new industries popped up. Different ways to make money, different jobs. Britain didn't need the slave trade as much anymore.
Plus, cheaper sugar from India started coming in. Suddenly, those slave-run plantations in the West Indies, not so profitable.
It's like the whole economic argument for slavery was falling apart. Not that morality mattered more all of a sudden, but the money wasn't there like it used to be.
Like this perfect storm brewing, right? Abolitionists fighting, the economy changing.
Yeah.
And then people's opinions start to shift, too.
Yeah, this is where it all connects. The source talks about awareness growing. Slavery wasn't some faraway thing anymore. It was being talked about, debated.
We see real action, too, like people boycotting sugar made by slaves, putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
And the petitions, tons of them flooding Parliament demanding change, hundreds of thousands of signatures.
The Zong massacre comes to mind. Over 100 slaves thrown overboard a ship. That caused a huge uproar.
Horrible event, but it got people's attention, fueled the outrage. You can almost feel this moral awakening happening. People were seeing the slave trade for what it was.
It wasn't like some fairy tale ending. It was this long, hard fight on so many levels. political, economic, social, really makes you think how, I don't know, ingrained these awful systems can be.
It does. Shows how change needs to come from everywhere, Passionate people, the economy shifting, public support.
Like, all of those pieces have to line up before anything really happens. But it does show change is possible, even when it feels impossible.
The abolitionists proved that, never giving up, even when it seemed like they were fighting a losing battle.
Yeah. Reminds us we all have a part to play. Sometimes it's speaking up. Sometimes it's changing our own actions. Sometimes it's supporting the people who are, leading the charge.
And realizing it's rarely easy, this fight for justice. It's messy, takes time. But the slave trade's end shows us it's worth it.
Totally. So wrapping up this deep dive, I think the main takeaway is history is more than just facts and dates. It's these stories of resilience, strategy, and, hope. And it's on us to, learn from them. Use those lessons for the problems we face today.